And we come on to the final question. We've been going on way too long. I don't know how long we've been going on for, but for me it's way too long. I'm desperate for a drink. It's from a chap called Brian Stevenson. You often mention your connection to Doctor Who with prop building and design, and latterly toy and model design. Just how close have you come to the franchise or the production of the show over the years, and how did it begin? I've actually practiced answering this question, and that in itself took about 45 minutes, so I'm not doing that. But the answer spans about 20 years. It begins in the middle 1980s, where you will know that my dad spoiled the idea of the TARDIS to me. Now, I wanted to make films. After seeing that the TARDIS wasn't real, I started wanting to make films. So I build stuff, I would write scripts, and I'd use the school cameras to film short films with my friends. It would always be mystery or action adventure stuff. And by the mid-80s, I really wanted to start doing Doctor Who. So I thought, well, the only way to do that is to really contact the BBC, but I didn't know how. My parents said to me, look, the only way to get the answers you want is to ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. And what's the worst that they can do? They can either not reply or tell you no or tell you to sod off. So it began with me writing letters to all and sundry at the BBC, people at BBC Worldwide, the production office at BBC Visual Effects, people like Tony Harding and Ian Scoones, for example, I would write to. Matt Irvin I'd write to. John Nathan Turner I'd write to. But the problem with writing letters, I found, was you couldn't get everything you wanted in a letter. I wanted more of an immediate response. So, taking my parents' advice, I just called them. And in those days, what you'd do is you could either ring direct, but I didn't have their direct numbers. You would ring the switchboard, ask to be put through to so-and-so at this department, and they would do it without question. And bearing in mind I was 10 years old, I would ring people like John Nathan Turner, and surprisingly, he took the call, just as the others did. They could have told me they weren't in. Occasionally I did have, oh yeah, he's in a meeting, and you think, oh yeah, he doesn't want to talk to me. But that wasn't the case. If John or whoever said they were in a meeting, they would always call back, either that day or that afternoon or the next day. They would always call me back, which was nice. Hang on, let me just check something. 2 ticks. Just got to check something on the old monitor here. Are we still recording? Yes, we are. Oop, sorry about that. Yeah, so where were we? Calling them. Yeah, so I started calling them. And, John was especially John Nathan Turner, was very well aware of my interest in props and design and what have you. And strangely, he entertained that. Whether he was just humouring me, I don't know. But over the years, he and I developed a decent friendship. Now, okay, look, we all know that the elephant in the room, he's been accused of some stuff. And I talked to my mum about this. I said, look, at the time, were you aware of any of this? Because I certainly wasn't. And she said, look, if I had even remotely suspected that he was up to no good, I would have stopped your contact with him and the rest of them immediately. So that kind of backs up what I've always felt, that my relationship to John Nathan Turner and the other people of his ilk was very innocent and professional above board. John in particular treated me with great respect, great humility, always had time for me. And without him, I wouldn't have had access to half the stuff that I did. So anyway, he was very much aware that I was into, television production. And I very much remember one day in 1989, I'd just been making a short film for, it was something we called Activities Week. So I made the short film, and I wanted more, and I wanted to do it professionally. So I rang up John. Damn it. Sorry about that, folks. I just checked the camera to see how far I was getting, and it's all well and good. And then a few minutes later, the old memory card filled up, so I had to stop filming, offload the footage, and make some space. So here we are, we're back again. So we're on that final question. I've got a drink this time, so I was absolutely parched, and I still am, so... Lovely. So where were we? Activities Week 1989, I just made some films. And I was really into the idea of film production. I mean, by this point, I knew already that that's what I wanted to do, but I really wanted to do it. So with the massive brass balls that I had at the time, I decided I'm going to pitch a script to John Nathan Turner. And I rang him up, and as always, he took my call. Could have told me to sod off or pretended he wasn't there, but he didn't. He took my call. And I told him about Activities Week. I told him about what I've been doing, that I've been making some films in the past, and that I've been writing scripts and what have you, and I'd love to try my hand at it professionally. Now, in my mind, I was thinking of Andrew Smith, who was only a few years older than me at the time, so I thought, well, if he can do it, and he wrote Full Circle, if he can do it, then surely I would have a shot at it as well. So he listened to my pitch. I mean, this wasn't anything official along those lines, this was just a phone call. So what I did is I pitched my idea because he wanted to know what it was, and to be honest, I can't really remember much about it. But I do remember that whatever this story was, it required a load of flashbacks back to when the Doctor was still on Gallifrey. They weren't a huge part of it, but they built like the foundations to whatever was going on in this story was underpinned by whatever this event was back on Gallifrey before the Doctor had even left. Now, I had written it being aware that they probably wouldn't be able to get the first Doctor in, so I had made a much, much younger version, say maybe someone in their 20s. And John just said to me, look, that's not the sort of story we're going for at the moment. It was all about the mystery of who the Doctor was, and they felt, in particular John said, that the more you reveal, the more you dispel the idea of Doctor Who. So they wanted to up the mystery, not answer it, and say, look, this is what was going on. I hear they've completely undone it in the last series, but that's by the by. So he said, look, have you got any other ideas? And I said, yeah, I've got loads of ideas. And he said, well, pick one of those ideas and do a treatment, which is like a synopsis. A synopsis is like a couple of paragraphs. A treatment is more in-depth. I mean, it wasn't a scene breakdown. It was a treatment, this is the story, this is the setup, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And the one he said that I should go for was a story that I called at the time The Phoenix Protocol. And that was about the Doctor and Ace arriving on this alien planet that had a mysterious village there. And nothing about that village seemed right. It was just not what it appeared to be. So there's this big mystery involved in that. So John said, look, put that in writing. Do your treatment. And then what we'll probably ask you to do is a first script before the commission. And I was all full of beans, the exuberance of youth and thinking I could do this. So sometime later, it might have been a week or 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Andrew Cartmel and asking me, to send off this stuff. Now, in that letter was a breakdown of the character of the Doctor and the character of Ace, and then the rules of the Doctor Who universe. And within that rules, it told you what you can and can't do with the TARDIS, how time travel works in their universe. It just sort of broad spectrum notes on how to write for the show. And then within that, it also said, look, don't write stories about Daleks, because if you're going to pitch a story with Daleks or Cybermen or whoever, the likelihood is you are going to be rejected out of hand. The story would have to be bloody good to be accepted. And usually what they tend to do is, if they want a Dalek story, they will approach a writer. So obviously I wasn't going to do that. But within all that, the very last couple of pages was about script formatting. And it showed you how to format the script for the BBC. And this letter was like gold to me. This was my doorway into working on Doctor Who, the programme that I loved. And again, I was young. I was sort of 14-ish, 13, 14. Around the same time I built this. So I started writing. Now, a script for Doctor Who, I knew my story was going to be 4 episodes. I mean, ideally it would have been 3, but I could stretch it to 4. So in my mind's eye, it was going to be a 4-parter. So, on average, if your episode is 25 minutes, your script is going to be 25 minutes as well. So with great gusto, I was sat there typing away on the old typewriter. Tap, 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 tap. And I think I got about 12 pages in. And then I hit this block, like that. And I knew what I wanted to say. I sort of knew where I wanted it to go. But I wasn't happy with the way it was turning out. And I was fretting over this thing over and over. You know, when you stare at a blank page, that's what I was staring at, blank pages for, beyond this halfway point that I'd got to. I just couldn't see how I could take this in a natural way. And I'm my own worst critic, so this is why, to bandy around the idea of being a perfectionist, often it's like, pat yourself on the back, look at how great I am. But no, in my case, being a perfectionist paralyzes me into not being able to do anything. And in this particular case, it paralysed me, it made me stressed, it made me nauseous. I was not physically sick, but I felt like I wanted to be physically sick. And this went on for days and weeks. I had my schoolwork to do, and I just couldn't concentrate. And it made me feel absolutely bloody miserable. But this was like, to me back then, I thought this was my big chance, my big break. I might be writing for Doctor Who. Now, bearing in mind, this script had not been commissioned. This was just the pitch. This was before they tell you yes or no. Again, I thought that the story was good enough, but I just couldn't do it. I was so focused on getting everything right instead of drafting it. Thinking about this thing being just the first draft. I was trying to write a polished script as I went along, and that tripped me up, and I just couldn't do it. So I remember my mum and dad sort of taking me to one side. They knew something was up. I was obviously complaining about it, and I didn't look too good. And they said, "Look, if it's not fun for you, then you've got to stop." And they sort of, my parents were very encouraging, and I just, in my heart of heart, I just knew I wasn't ready. I didn't feel I had the life experience. Yes, I've written loads of scripts for school stuff, but we're talking professionally on the BBC. No money had been exchanged. Again, I want to stress I was not commissioned to write this. This was my spec script. But I realised I just couldn't do it. I just didn't feel ready. And my mum and my dad encouraged me to get back on the phone, ring John and explain the situation. And I did. And I have to admit, I was scared. I thought he would get cross with me, thought I was wasting his time, but he didn't. I think he actually respected that I could see my limitations at that point. So he wished me best of luck and that we'd talk again soon. No, I didn't speak to him for months after that, but I kept in contact with him. He offered me my first proper job on with the BBC on a Doctor Who exhibition much later, but that's by the by. So time sort of marched on, and I thought to myself, I love Doctor Who so much, but doing that one thing, that script, gave me so much stress that stress could have then turned into resentment, which would have then turned into loathing. I didn't want to turn something I loved into something I hated. So I came up with this little rule. Never work on Doctor Who, because it's the one programme you like. Working on it will probably destroy it for you. So I kept that, okay, in around 2000, sort of 1999, 2000, I did start working on a new Doctor Who script. It wasn't for the BBC, but it was licensed, funny enough. Not licensed to be broadcast, but it was licensed to be sold on video, and I think DVD was in its infancy at that point. YouTube was just coming along, so it would have been done like that, and we would have raised some money for charity. Now, John Nathan Turner and Gary Downey were involved. Not in a really direct way, but in a more like an advisory. We called them the executive producers. Ultimately, John died, of course, in 2002, and that sort of kiboshed that for a couple of years, and then Gary died, I think end of 2005, 2006, and that really knocked the project on the head. But around 2003, when we were me and Gary were talking about it, we're going to do this project in John's memory, I received a letter from BBC Worldwide saying, you can still do your film, but we're going to put certain caveats on it. And I think they took a few things that we couldn't do. So I know we were allowed to do it on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure we were allowed to do the cinema-style showings, but I don't think we were allowed to sell on VHS or DVD. And I said to Gary, bet you any money they bring Doctor Who back. Be just bloody typical, wouldn't it? And of course, it was announced that, yep, Doctor Who was coming back. And I thought, oh, okay. Now, again, bearing in mind that I said I never wanted to work on Doctor Who, for a moment I was caught up in the idea of, I wonder if I could get work on it. And I thought, do I really want to do it? And bearing in mind I was at university at the time, so I knew I wouldn't be able to work permanently on Series 1. So what I could do was design and build the TARDIS. So what I did is I contacted, I think his name was Mal Young. I think he was the controller of BBC One Drama. I got in touch with him. I actually phoned him up, sent him all my photographs, sent him bits of my portfolio, my CV, explained what I wanted to do, and he reacted positively to it. He said, yeah, okay. Because they were still getting in various contractors and what have you, sorting out who's going to be doing what. But I'd have to wait until the producers were brought online. So eventually the producers did come along. I can't remember who came first. Got a feeling it was Julie Gardner came on first, followed by Phil Collinson. So they had a look at my stuff, and we had a phone call. I know I spoke to both of them independently, not on the same phone call. And they liked what they saw. They liked my ideas, what I was going to do. All that sort of guff. And I said, look, I could start building this TARDIS now. It is just a police box, or a variation of a police box. Let's just do it. And they said, well, look, we've got a production designer, and that's his job to oversee what he wants. Yes, you'll probably end up designing it, but he would want to put his 2 pence worth in it as well. So I thought, okay, that's fair enough. I understand that. So we knew it was a guy called Ed Thomas that was coming on, but he was working on something else, and it hadn't been announced yet. So we had to wait for him, and finally he came on board and it was announced. And I rang him, briefly talked about what I was going to suggest, what I was going to showcase. And he said, yeah, we definitely need a face-to-face meeting in Llandaff. I think it was Llandaff House or something like that. But we have to wait until our art director comes on board. So again, it was more waiting. So eventually Stephen Nicholas, I think his name was, came on board, and a meeting was set up between myself and my mate Phil, who's going to be building this project with me, and Ed and Steve. So we went up to Cardiff this one day, armed with my drawings that I was going to present to them, this model that I'd got out of storage, and various other bits and pieces that we could potentially provide. So we sat down, and I pitched my TARDIS build to them. And I said, look, the problem with the TARDIS that I always had was that I felt it was too small. However, the TARDIS and a police box should not look the same, because the TARDIS is an alien spacecraft's interpretation of what it thinks a police box looks like, so it gets things a little bit wrong. Now, the problem with the police box to me is, A, they look top-heavy, but also the doors are way too tall. They're 6'10", and he noted that down in his little red book. The problem with the 6'10", if you're under 6 foot tall, that door makes you look very, very small. So I wanted to retain a 6'6" door, but make the roof bigger and the base bigger, and beef out the corner posts and set the walls back further, just to sort of give it this sort of, this real idea of it being a 3D element, because this one here looks a bit flat. If you look at the contrast between the walls and the corner posts, it's not set back very far. It looks a bit flat. So I wanted to sort of adjust all that. So we sort of discussed it, and he said, Ed said they wanted the thing to be made of wood, and I told them that only the very early ones were made of wood, the later ones were all concrete. But no, he was adamant he wanted it to be made of wood, that you had to see the wood grain, and that they wanted 5 of these things. And each of these 5 had to be identical, including the wood grain. Because he said you didn't want to be able to look at the different TARDISes and see, the different wood grains. So obviously that meant that we would make one in wood, texture it up, take a fiberglass mould, and then cast out fiberglass copies, which was, no problem. Now, the problem I had was, because I had other commitments, I only had a small window to build this, and this window was rapidly coming up. And decisions at this point still hadn't been made. However, I spoke to my mate Phil, and I said, look, can we build 5 in, that I think it was 6 or 8 weeks? And yeah, we thought we could. At most even if we got say 3 done, we could give them the 3 and then give them the 2, a couple of weeks later, the 2 extra. So the one thing that slightly annoyed me was we were constantly waiting. Everything seemed to be caught up in red tape, and we were always waiting for somebody to come on board or someone to make a decision or someone to do something. And to me, it just seemed unnecessary. Look, we know it's a police box. Just say you like the designs, I'll go off and build it and make it. But no, we couldn't do it. That's not how it works. Fair enough. But I was starting to get a little, not pissed. The idea that I said about the thing you love becoming the thing you start to despise started to bubble up. But I was willing to sort of suppress that just to work on the TARDIS. And time just dragged on. And as I said, I was at university at the time and I had other commitments to do there. Now, when I was at university, I was 10 years older than all of my co-students. And one of our lecturers, or our main lecturer, was actually only a few years older than me. So we used to socialise outside of the university. Now, the interesting thing is, one of my lecturer's mates happened to work, and one day when we were socialising, I mean, I don't drink, but we're at a pub, his mate from, I'm not going to say who it was there, and my lecturer mentioned to his mate that I'd been pitching to build the TARDIS, so we had that Doctor Who connection, because they were pitching as well. And he felt the same way. He said, they're just dragging their feet. Now, to give them their dues, they were finding their feet. That this was all very new to them. The BBC had not done anything like Doctor Who in a long time. So, again, it was new territory. But there was this constant consternation between the BBC and all the outside contractors and all the people working on it, that things that should have been being done weren't being done, and things that really didn't need to be done just yet were being overanalyzed. People were saying, I don't want to go into all the details, but people weren't happy. The phrase, if this was any other programme, we'd tell them to go fuck themselves, was a phrase I often heard. It was, yeah. But this is not to denigrate the producers or anyone. We all understood, but it was just time was dragging by. And my window of opportunity by this point was, we're getting dangerously close to it, and there was no decision. So I remember ringing Ed up first thing on a Monday morning saying, Ed, about my other things that I've got to be getting on with, my other, my university work, my other commissions that I was doing at the time are coming up soon. If you can't make your final decision by this Friday, I'm going to have to pull out. And he was fine with it. There was nothing nasty about this. This was all very amicable. I mean, at the end of the day, it's business. So I left it until exactly 2:30 on that Friday, and I'd not heard anything. I pretty much knew they hadn't made the decision. So I rang my mate first and said, look, I'm about to ring them and pull out. Are you okay with this? And, he was fine with it. It would have been a great opportunity for us. It would have been a fantastic opportunity. I would have absolutely loved to have done it. But the timings just weren't working out. So I rang Ed and I explained to him, have you got your decisions yet? And he said, nope. I said, okay, then that's us out then. And, we were absolutely fine about it. We left on very good terms. In fact, when the first photograph of the prop that they had built, and bearing in mind they asked us for 5 made out of fiberglass, they ended up making 2 out of wood, and you could tell them apart very easily, I might add. A picture of it broke in the newspaper. And my phone went that morning, and it was Ed Thomas. And he's all very jovial, oh, hello. I could hear work going on in the background, drills being used, saws being used. I said, what's that noise? What are you doing? And he said, we're building 10 Downing Street. So obviously they were working on the Slovene story. He said, have you seen it? And I knew what he was talking about. He was talking about the TARDIS. I said, yeah, I've seen it. It's really nice. I said, it's a bit different to what I would have done. He goes, oh, yeah, we took, we wanted to beef it out, do the old British Bulldog thing. I said, yeah, I remember. I said to him, look, the only thing about it is it looks a bit theatrical. And he said, well, how do you mean? I said, well, it looks like it's been designed to be observed from the back of a theatre with a prop on stage. And because, the windows were, quite enlarged, and, it just looked like it was designed to be seen from very far away. It was also very flat. But it was the TARDIS, and that's what they designed, and that's what they had, and it was the TARDIS. And, There's a bit of consternation with the fans when they saw it. They're complaining about the windows being too big and all that nonsense. And yes, I was a part of that, but I did point out that the McGann TARDIS had square windows as well. No one seems to remember that bit. So so we ended on good terms. My little brush with the new series, and I thought nothing more of it. I went off and did various work. I think I worked on Casino Royale, and I ended up doing loads of design work for other places and what have you. And then one day I got a phone call when Matt Smith had just become the Doctor, and they were doing the very first Dalek story, and the company that I had been working for, that had also worked on Doctor Who for the first few series, said that their neighbours were working on the show, and now they're the people that built the console room. The one that looked like a big organic and brass cheesemobile, and they wanted to put this Spitfire in there, so they needed an extra body for about a week, and was I interested? And by this point there was absolutely no way I could do it. I was too busy working on some other stuff, shall we say, and I just couldn't commit to it, so I said no straight away, which was fine. And then a bit later on, when Michael Pickwood became the production designer, I had some props, and I thought, well, make a bit of money out of them, loan them to the BBC. So I was talking to him while he was on a break. He was living over in Oxford, which isn't far from where I am. So I had a bit of a chinwag with him about loaning out these props, and I have to say, the stuff he was saying to me sounded like bullshit. More bloody red tape, which I wasn't overly pleased about. And I just thought, this isn't going anywhere, that's fine. I wasn't bothered. It was, a quick punt on the idea. But he sort of asked me about myself. What was I doing? So I told him my history. And he said, look, why don't you send your CV and your portfolio to us? Which I thought, okay, so I agreed. I thought, yeah, okay. Because they can't just give you a job over the phone. You've got to go through all the, jump through hoops and jump over stuff and through things and around things. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I put the phone down. And my wife had heard all this. And she said, so what are you going to do? And I said, absolutely nothing. And I meant that, absolutely nothing. I'm not... given what had happened with, that script writing back in 1989, and then what happened in 2005, I was reminded that, do I really want to do it? Do I really want to work on it? I can work on other programmes or other films, I'm fine with that. But I stuck by my guns and said, nope. Now, if the BBC said to me, okay, here is Doctor Who, in its entirety, run it, would I do it? Yeah, of course I would. Of course I would. Because at least then I have absolute control. When you work for someone else, you have to go by what they say. And when you're too close to things, you can sort of have disagreements. Like I did say to Ed Thomas once, in terms of your design choice, it's like we're on the same road, but you've gone off on one pitch, and I'm travelling along the other. So we have similar ideas. It's like the idea of the Time War. I came up with that in a film years before they did it. So, but there are only so many ideas. But it's all about, you can have similar ideas, but they're suitably different, but along the same lines. And I think I'm too close to the idea of Doctor Who to sort of relinquish certain things. And like I said, if there's things I disagree with, I'm probably not going to have it sit too well. And being that perfectionist, wanting it to be just the way I want it to be, or just right on. It's. I think at the end of the day, I think it's more trouble than it's worth, and it would end up poisoning the well, and I don't want that. So it may sound stupid and it may sound long-winded as an answer, because I did say this is story time, but that's how it went down. Anyway, I know I've been talking for way too long. This is at least 40 minutes longer than I thought it would be. So what I'm going to do is call it quits here. That is the last question. So thank you to everybody for chipping in with your questions. I've really enjoyed answering them. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me. I know I've whittled on a bit. What I probably will do is break this down into 3, 4, maybe 5 parts. I don't know. I'll have to see when we get to the edit stage. So if I do break it down, they are going to end abruptly to some degree. So, but thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your good wishes as well about my health. I trust everyone as well. But until next time, stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon.